Learn from the past, but don't live in it. This is an insight that I've had for a while now that has really just transformed the way that I live. I used to be stuck in the past. I don't know about you, but I used to dwell too much on my mistakes, all of the traumas, all of the hurt. Now, I don't want you to feel bad for me because I've kind of started to dive deep into my past and heal these emotional wounds, heal this emotional trauma, and I hope other people are doing this as well so we aren't so hard on each other, so we don't hurt each other. So learn from the past, don't live in it. Now, there is so much that you can learn from the past. The problem is, most of us spend our time dwelling on the past. Most of us spend our time sleeping on the past, staying in the past, that we aren't able to actually be here and enjoy the present and learn all the lessons that we can learn right here. Now, you're going to realize that when you start to look back on your past, hopefully, there's two ways to look at it. Either your past was way worse than your present, or your past was way better than your present. So some people look back on the past and wish they could go back there because it was so much better than it is now. That would honestly, I would feel bad for that. That would suck if your past is way better than it is now. You're always trying to go back there. So that would be one reason that you're always living in the past, stuck in the past, and not learning from it at all. On the other end of the spectrum, your past is way worse than it is now. You've improved so much. Your life has gotten so much better. You've evolved. You've become more of the person that you truly wanted to be, the person you truly knew you could be. And you're kind of extremely embarrassed by the past. Maybe you've even grown so much, like me, that you look back on yourself 4, 5, even 10 years ago, and you're like, was that the same person? Oh my gosh. Was that the same person? Because you've grown so much. You've learned so much on your journey. But even though you're embarrassed by that, and now this is the way that I view my life. I view my life that I've improved so much and that I've, grown and evolved on my journey through personal development and spirituality and this type of stuff that I look back on my past self and I cringe. I think that how could I have done that, or how could I have been so naive, or why was I following that teaching, or why did I hold this type of belief, or why did I hurt myself so much, or why did I hold and suppress all my emotions in and wasn't able to express them? So I was stuck on the past for a while. I was very hurtful. I was really blaming not just myself, which is never going to help. I was blaming everyone around me. I started to introspect back to my childhood, back to, middle school and also high school, and be like, why didn't I learn meditation? Oh gosh, that would be a whole different rant. Why didn't I learn meditation? Why didn't they give us good books to read in school and not just this Shakespeare crap and Catcher in the Rye and Animal Farm and oh my gosh, and that's a whole nother rant. But I was way too stuck in the past. I was living in the past. And the problem is that when you're living in the past, your body is still right here in the present, but your mind is in fairyland. Because you can't actually live in the past. Unless you have a time traveling machine, you'd probably go to the future, at least. I think I would go to the future. But you can't live in the past. All you're doing is recreating this memory. You're not really tapping into what really happened. You're recreating the memory, but you're changing certain things. And the more you start to do this, interestingly enough, the more you start to live in the past, quote unquote, create a new reality, a parallel reality that's, again, happening right now, the more you start to believe that your story of what happened is actually what happened. This isn't what we want to do. We want to, again, learn from the situation and then just kind of forget about it. There's really no need to remember it once you learn your lesson. But that's the important thing. You don't just want to block it out because it was a traumatic incident. There were a lot of traumatic incidents. We all have different traumas and different pains, and the point of this isn't to compare your traumas and your suffering to others, because some people are going to have it way worse off than others. That's just the way life is. The way life is it's a spectrum, kind of a spectrum of suffering, if you kind of want to look at it like that. And the point isn't to compare who's had it the worst, because a lot of people have had it terribly. The point is that we need to first face our own emotional traumas, emotional wounds, but then we can also help each other. I've gotten to the point where I would love to just help other people and talk about these things, because I've done a lot of this work on myself, and it was very difficult. It was very difficult to look back on some of these situations and write them down and see what lessons I can learn from them and look from a broader point of view, because if something traumatic happened to me 5 years ago, it was terrible in the moment, but now that I've grown, I've become stronger because of that incident, and now I'm able to look back on that and say, wow, I know that was really messed up in the moment, but I learned so much and I became so much stronger. And that's also one of the reasons why you don't want to live in the past, because if you can learn from these terrible incidents, especially, it's a lot easier to learn from your victories. That's kind of what it is. It's a lot easier to learn from your victories. So if your past was great and you didn't really have any suffering, didn't really have any trauma, that's great, but it might not have made you into a very strong person. Now, I'm not saying that you need to have this suffering or have gone through these traumas to become a stronger person, but if you did, understand that we sometimes use this as an excuse to say that I can't get better because I'm broken because of that's what happened to me. Trust me, I felt broken. Broken. I'm starting to like feel the emotions of broken, of how I felt, kind of channeling that back in my past, but I felt broken. I thought that somebody was gonna, some hero was gonna swoop down from the sky and help piece me back together. I kept waiting. I kept dwelling on the past. I kept living in the past. First of all, I missed what was happening right here in the present. I was missing all the beauty. I was missing all the love. I was missing everything. Until I started to take my power back and realize that, yes, I can be the seamstress. I can piece myself back together. Ooh, just got some chills, some good poetry there. I can piece myself back together. I can learn from some of these lessons from the past. And in future videos, I'll definitely share some of these kind of healing from traumatic incidents that I had in my past. Maybe some people will be able to relate, and maybe it'll just be a good way to kind of express and share it on camera, because I know when I was writing these things down, one of the ways that I would recommend learning from your past and not living in the past is to journal about these things that happened in the past. That was something that I did. I started this kind of mini journaling series called Journaling for Healing Past Traumas, I think. It was either journaling for healing emotional traumas or journaling for healing past traumas, but I did a brainstorm of maybe 15 to 18 of the most traumatic things that I could remember from my past. And first of all, understand that this isn't easy at all. This took me months and even years of working on myself, of going through the going through the surface layer emotional turbulence to then get to the really deep stuff. And I don't know if you can tell, but I love this stuff. Maybe I'm crazy for loving this stuff, but I had the wrong mindset about all of this. I had the wrong mindset about what happened to me. And I know it would make more sense when I start sharing more specific things, but I really just felt broken. I felt sad. I felt alone inside. I also just want to share this as a ray of hope, of optimism, that if you're going through something similar right now, understand that you can climb out of the abyss. You can raise your consciousness. You can rise up, but it takes facing this emotional pain, facing this emotional drama. All I was doing was running away from it, living in the past, trying to bury myself in these kind of fantasy lands and imagination land, instead of just being right here, right now, the only place where I can be. And this also brings up the point for me that time is just an illusion. In reality, there is no such thing as the past or the future. These are things that our mind projects. So, if you're living in the past or the future, you're still living right now. But the difference is, if you're living in the past, let's say, projecting yourself into the past, you're basically just creating a new mental reality where you're saying that you don't like the way that you are right now, you don't like the way the present is right now, so you'd rather not focus on anything that is quote-unquote real, if we're going to call things real or fake. You'd rather project yourself into another reality where you relive the suffering over and over and over again. And that was what I was doing. That sounds crazy to think about now, but that's what I was doing for maybe a year or two. I was so sad, I was so depressed. All I was doing was focusing on all the traumatic things that happened to me. I didn't know how to recontextualize them. I didn't know how to reframe them. All I was doing was basically reliving them, suffering over and over and over again in my mind. But there was no benefit that came from this, because I didn't I wasn't even doing this consciously. Another thing that I want to mention here is that when you're living in the past, when you're stuck in the past, when you're not learning from it, you're not usually doing it consciously. Consciously is always in the present. But we're stuck in these unconscious patterns that we revert back to the past because we didn't face these emotional wounds, these emotional traumas. So I was so stuck in my mind, so stuck in the past, reliving all these events and feeling the emotional pain, the emotional trauma over and over and over again until the point where it really dragged me down, kind of like anchors tied to my feet, dragging me down, kind of like sinking, the metaphor of sinking in an ocean or sinking in an abyss. And I just felt like I was emotionally drowning. Couldn't breathe deep. I was breathing very shallow. I didn't even meditate. Everything that I'm doing now in my life to help level up and raise my consciousness, raise my vibe, I wasn't doing back then. So when I started to become more aware of this, again, one through meditation, I started to view these stories that I was telling myself because, again, when you're living in the past, it's really just you telling yourself the story, creating a new mental universe, mental reality, and then inserting yourself in that to then deal with it again, to then experience it again. But the problem is, if you're not conscious of it, you're not there to learn a lesson. So then I realized that I was doing this hundreds of times, maybe even thousands of times unconsciously, unaware that I was even actually doing it until I started to, again, introspect, meditate, journal. And then once I started this journal, I had the intention that I'm going to relive this one more time. I'm going to write it down so it's ingrained in my mind, but I'm going to write it down while looking for lessons in every single part of this story, things that I can learn from. So I take this event, this traumatic event that I've been dealing with for a while, writing it down, learning all of these lessons, and then usually meditating before, during, and after because it gets very deep. And then it's kind of the way I felt like when I was writing it. I'm definitely going to share it. I didn't even think about sharing this stuff. I didn't even think that people would care. Maybe nobody else would care, but I know that it could be inspiring for somebody who, again, has had a similar trauma, not anything that is better or worse, because, again, we don't want to compare these things. We want to learn from them. So I wrote it all down. I learned specific lessons from it, and then it was kind of just like I let it go. Like I still have that notebook, and if I ever want to learn new lessons from it, I can go back in there, and it's right there, and it's exactly, again, maybe not the way I remember it, but the way I remember it. But the big part about that is that I'm kind of taking this memory out of my mind. It's still in my mind. It's still ingrained there somewhere, but I'm a lot more conscious of it, a lot more aware of it, taking my mind, putting it out onto paper, putting this memory onto paper, and learning lessons from it, which the lessons then get reinserted into my mind in the same place where that story was. So now I'm way more conscious of it, and I don't get triggered by these unconscious emotions that I was suppressing from my past. Wow. And so I no longer live there. Now, this took me a while to get to this point where I was able to write these 9 journals about these 9 things that happened in the past, and then learning the lessons from them. But after I finished those 9 journals, I actually wrote those journals in a couple of days. But again, it took me years of building a foundation where I could be able to go back and face these emotions. So that's why I say it took me years to build up to it, to the point where I just let it all flow. I let it all out. And I felt thousands of pounds lighter, maybe even millions of pounds lighter. Just felt like taking these boulders off my shoulders, that's a great rhyme, this burden off my chest. Everything felt so much lighter. My mind felt so much lighter. I felt like I was way more engaged in the present because I learned all these lessons from the past situations that I've been replaying on my mind. And since, maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is that these situations keep filling our minds until we learn the lesson that we're supposed to learn from them. So I wrote all these stories down, learned some lessons. I'm sure if I go back, I could learn even more lessons that apply to me even now. I did this about 6 months ago, so they could even apply to me now. But I learned all these lessons, took these stories out of my mind, became more conscious, more aware of what I was doing with them. And then, wow, I haven't been dwelling that much on the past anymore because I brought it to the light. I faced it, and I realized that I'm focused on right here and right now. So don't live in the past. Learn from it. Learn from the past, but don't live in it. This is huge. This is absolutely huge. And I'm glad I was able to make this video and share this, because I'll be able to watch this back and say, maybe 5 years, if I'm living in the past, and be like, no, do not live in the past. Learn from it. You can only learn from the past with what you know now. You might have made some mistake. You might have had some suffering in the past. You didn't know what you know now. You are not the person that you are now. You can't judge your past self based on what you know now. And that was a huge thing that I had to learn. I had to go through these situations. Maybe I didn't have to, but I did go through these situations. There's no reason to deny that I went through these situations. There's no reason to suppress them. There's no reason to pretend like they didn't happen. The big part is facing these things, bringing them to the light, which is hard. It absolutely is hard. It takes a lot of work. Most people can't even do it alone. It takes a lot of strength, a lot of courage. So if this is something that you'd want to do, I mean, hit me up. I would just love to chat, love to talk. I don't know. Don't live in the past. Don't live in the past, but learn from it. Learn from the past. There's so many lessons that you can learn from the past, but don't live in it. Live here, now, the present.